Hello, welcome to Module 4. In this module, we shall be looking at forms and tables. So forms are a fundamental part of the web, and it is one of the ways that we collect user data. If you're excited about learning this, join me and let us dive right in. The way we define a form using HTML is by using the form tag. So if we just type form, and I will just use what the AI has generated, and then let us remove everything. The form element is just a parent element that wraps other children form inputs, which are used to collect the data. And maybe just to go over the attributes, we have the action, and the action is basically, in case we submit the form, where should this data be taken? And the method is, how do we pass the data to this URL? So for instance, we can have a separate file called submit.php, and let us not dive deep into this because we are not learning PHP. And using the PHP, we are able to extract the data that has been posted from the form. But for example's sake, I will use just the same file, let it submit to itself, and let us change this method from post to get. You shall see the reason why in a few. So the way we define inputs is by using the input type, and we do have 3 inputs in HTML majorly that we use to collect data. The first one, and I will just use label. Label is just to label the data, label for, and I'll say first name, label for first name, and I will create an input type text. Note that for the for attribute, it needs to match the ID attribute in the input. And if we save that, we can see on our HTML, we do have an input field with a label first name of type text. With the input field, we are able to change the different types. For example, in this case, we do have text. We are also able to use email. Let me first create second name. Oops. And just say this is last name. Last name, and we end up with 2 input fields. Apart from text, we also have other types of input fields. And remember, you can also go to developer.mozilla to get an entire list of all the types of inputs. But for the sake of this tutorial, just know that we are also able to change the type from text to email. And if we save that, as much as there might not be any noticeable difference between the text and email, it becomes very semantic when it comes to defining the data. So it is super important to actually define, like, okay, we are getting this type of data from the user, and it really helps when it comes to validation of the form. The other one that we have seen, and I probably know that you have seen this, is the password. So by changing the type to password, and I can save that and maybe get rid of the others so that we only remain with that. It will basically encrypt or add the dots so that you don't see the text input of your password, and that becomes super secure. At least maybe if somebody is peeping over your shoulder, they won't be able to guess your password, and that is super good. Apart from the input element, another type of form element that is generally used is what we call text area. And the main difference between maybe input type text and text area is for the text area, it is used to collect a multi-line input. For example, if you're writing comments or if you're writing something like a blog, it becomes super important. Basically long form content. And the way we define it is we can just start with a label. Same way for, and I can say comment for this case. Comment. And then text area with the ID for the label, and the ID should match. Then we have the name attribute. And here we have comment. And if I save, you can see that we end up with a text input that I'm able to expand as much as I want. And also it will allow me to add in multi-line text. So let us say you have defined your form and you want to submit that data to the backend. How do you do that? And the way you do it is you can define a button or use input type submit, which will generally invoke the action and the method that are defined on the form. Here is the reason why we defined or changed it to get. And if I can go back and say, let us just use one for now. Let's say label, name, then input type name. If I just say Kelvin and submit, you can see that we have name property with the value, and in this case name. To make it super clear, I will change this. Instead of name, I will change it to first name so that you don't confuse name and name. First name, and first name. So these are the attributes of the input fields, and these are user defined. And if I save that and go back, say Kelvin, you can see that first name, the property, is associated with the value of Kelvin, which I typed in the form. So for the get method, it will pass data through the URL, and that is not ideal because there is a maximum limit, and you also don't want to expose the user data on the URL. That is why we use the post method to do that. The final input type is what we refer to as the select. So we have gone over input element, we have gone over text area, and the final one is select. And it's just basically used to create a drop down. So if I have the element select, the name, and the option. So the name is basically just the name of the property that will be used to attach the value. So the property and the value. And the options, these are what the user will select. So if we save that, we can see that I have different options that I'm able to select. The final input field is the select input field, which is basically used to create a drop down that can be selected by the user. And here we have a simple example. We do have a select input, then the different option or the list of options that the user can select from. When it comes to table, there is a similarity between tables and forms in that we also have a parent element that wrap other children elements of the same element, and in this case table. So to start us off, we shall have a table element, which is the parent, and we do have three main children at the second level. And in this case, we have the T head, which is basically just the heading of the table. We do have the T body, where the data is defined, and finally T footer. Even though T footer is rarely used, but it is good for you to know that it is there. So when we save that, we can't see anything. Let us go in and define the specific data points. And we can see for the header, we have to start with the table row, then the table heading. And in this case, we have first name, last name, phone number. Let us reduce this to maybe age. And the immediate question that you'll ask yourself, like, okay, you're defining all these data points, but I'm not seeing the table being rendered. Let us try to add in some data and see what happens. So the same way that we have the table row in the header, in the table body, we also have to start with table row. And then under that, we can now define the table data using the element TD. So we have John Doe, email. Let's just define that. And then age 25. We can say example at email.com. And we end up with some sort of a table, even though it is not clear that this is a table. So the way we bring the lines in the table is by using the border attribute. And if we just add that in, you can clearly see like, hey, okay, we are ending up with something that looks like a table. Even though it looks ugly, there are better ways of styling that data using CSS. But since we are not learning CSS, this is the default way that the table renders. We are able to add multiple lines of data. So just by copying that and duplicating, you can see that we end up with multiple lines of data. And that is how we define a table. For the footer, we can just use the same example, in this case, table row and the table data to define the footer. But one item that you have seen that has been introduced is column span. And basically this is just used to collapse as the specified number of columns. So in this case, 3 are joined to form 1. And you can see we have the label total and then the accumulated results of 100 of the last column. So that is an important attribute that you need to know how to use it if you want to achieve different ways of formatting table. Yeah, so that is all about tables. Tips. So when it comes to tips, number 1, always try as much as possible to validate your HTML using tools like the W3C validator. Go online, copy paste your code there, and it will be able to validate your HTML. Number 2, don't use tables for styling. Tables are not designed for styling. We have other elements that are better suited for layouts or laying out data on the web page. So don't use table for layout. Only use table when it comes to rendering tabular data. Yeah, so that is it. If you have had fun and if you have gotten value out of this video, I'm sure you will enjoy the other video. And if you haven't watched my previous video, please go back and watch the entire playlist, and see you in the next one.